Thank you. Yeah, and if you have your applications, thanks so much. So second, 15, very good. I would go during the whole we're not doing it. To get the experience of going to college. So anytime from the 28th of September to the 7th of October. So maybe the very beginning of October.
Hi, how are you? Nice to see you.
Good to see you again.
So
Yes. I find it fascinating. It's his view, from the way he teaches
they also have good. Absolutely.
But he went to his last marathon. Anyway, he learning how to get right now. But he's going to go back to his master's. But he'll be in town next week. His ship comes and goes.
Well, the writer's director.
25 foot slope.
Unbelievably funny. Yeah. I vote for the person, not the party. Ooh, I gotta turn those lights on.
Right now, you just have one two-sided sheet of paper. I'll be handing something else out in a bit. But this is all you get for now. Can you see it? for someone who's never heard of the Jewish holidays, right? And the point of what I did last week was for you to see in that one chapter of Torah, that one chapter from Leviticus, what the holidays were that were mentioned in the Torah. But the reason I kept saying we'll talk about this later, we'll talk about this later, we'll talk about this later, is we are going to talk about all of that later. Every one of those holidays that we skipped over so quickly gets its own week in this class. Now, each of those weeks isn't enough time to talk about any of those holidays, but I think it will make much more sense. Well, I know it'll make more sense than it did last week, because last week we really didn't talk about them. When we talked about the calendar at the end, that was to show you, and I know not everyone was here last week, but that was really just to show you how the Hebrew calendar is different than the calendar that we're all used to in this country. And really to explain why we can't just say that Rosh Hashanah is on September 17th. Because since the Hebrew calendar is based both on the moon and the sun, right? And the reason that I explained that whole system of leap years, which is confusing, but it shows why the holidays will keep moving later, then jump earlier, then keep moving later, then jump earlier. And that is the most important thing to get out of last week, that if we get this listing of holidays in the Torah, that we celebrate the holidays differently today than how they're described in the Torah. And I heard Rabbi again talking about the system of sacrifice at the temple versus the way that we pray today. I'm going to add to prayer some other observances that we have. And that the Hebrew calendar, based both on the moon and the sun, will change from year to year. Okay, does that help? Good. Now, the very first thing we read in Leviticus 23, if any of you kept it, anyone keep it? Can someone, the one from last week, can someone read the first verse for me super loud? Because I don't have it with me. Last week, Leviticus 23. You want me to read it? Yeah? Oh, okay. I have the microphone. No, The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, these are my fixed times, the fixed times of the Lord, which you shall proclaim as sacred occasions. On 6 days work may be done, but on the 7th day there shall be a Sabbath of complete rest, a sacred occasion. You shall do no work. It shall be a Sabbath of the Lord throughout your settlements." Okay, and that was the first one where I said, we're skipping that, we're going to talk about it later. Tonight is our leader. Okay? So when we see the English word, oh, that's not right. Cool. That's my workout for the week. English word Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat. Leviticus 20